Hello everyone, my name is Maddie and welcome to my channel. So today is the first wrap-up video that I've done on my channel. It's for the month of May. I actually had quite a few books done in May. I was not expecting to read as much as I did, and I'm really happy with quite a few of the books that I did read. But before we get into all of that, I wanted to say a joke. So why did Billy throw the clock out of the window? Because he wanted to see time fly. Time sure flew for this month. The first thing I wanted to do is go over some stats. I promise this won't take too long, but I thought that, for those of you that enjoy stats as much as I do, that you would appreciate the pages I've read, the genres I've read, all of that kind of stuff. So first of all, I wanted to go over how many books. So the books that I've read the number of books that I've read is 10. The average page length is 134. Which is quite a bit more than I usually do. I try to go around 100 pages a day, but there were just so many good books this month. As you can see, this huge pile that I have next to me, that average went up quite a bit. So the total number of pages that I've read this month is 4,148 pages. That's not completely accurate. I was reading a textbook for class as well, so I have a few pages from that. And I had actually started one of these books before May started, so technically it's probably around 4,000, maybe a little bit more. But hey, that's a crazy number. I was not expecting to go that high. And then the number of books that I've read this year is 41 out of my goal, which was 50. I'm going to be able to reach this goal hopefully in June, so I'm going to be bumping it up. I'm almost tempted to make my goal 100 books. I've never read that many books in my life, like in 1 year. So let me know in the comments if you want to see me try and make that goal of 100 books. So as far as star ratings go for this month, and I'll be able to tell you what the star ratings were for each individual book, I had 0 DNFs, which I'm very thankful for, 0 1 stars and 0 2 stars. I did have 3 3-star reviews. And I'll go over that more specifically. I had 2 4-stars and 5 5-stars, and I'm very happy that half the books I read were 5 stars. They are very much worthy of that status. And as far as genres, I read 2 mysteries, which is pretty rare for me. I don't really read that many mysteries, but I did read 2 of them this month. I read 3 contemporary, mostly romance and LGBTQ kind of books in that range. I read 4 fantasy books, which doesn't surprise me. Fantasy is my favorite, so I was expecting to read mostly that this month, and 1 sci-fi. So the first book that I'm going to talk about is A Little Life by Hanya Yanaghara. I was actually going to do a reading vlog for this book, but I was kind of reading it off and on for about a week, and I had a lot going on during that week. You're actually going to see my first reading vlog go up hopefully next week, and it's going to be starting with the month of June. But, so this book, let's just say it was hard to read. A lot of YouTubers read this book. It's definitely one that is kind of that FOMO sense of, the fear of missing out, and that, if you're a booktuber, you have to read this book. If you read a lot, you have to read this book. Like that. That's kind of the impression I've gotten from quite a few people that I've seen videos of. Noelle Gallagher actually was the one that introduced me to this book, even though she had read it pretty late, from the trend that this book had. So I was really curious about it. I heard that it was really sad. There was a lot of real emotions and real like thoughts coming from this book. And so I really wanted to like experience it for myself. And so it's about these four guys that found each other through college, and they kind of like continued to be a part of each other's lives as they grew up. And so the book kind of follows their lives as they like develop in their careers and their lives, and who their partners are. It mainly focuses on Jude and Willem in the story, and kind of how they become closer, and how Jude kind of deals with a lot of issues. There's a lot of trigger warnings for this book. I would not recommend this book to any lighthearted readers or any readers that are triggered by like self-harm and suicidal thoughts, and just like very depressing, kind of like you not being able to manage life. And that's kind of what was happening in this story. I won't go into too much detail because really it's just, I'm glad that I read it and I definitely got something out of it, but I don't know if I would recommend it to anyone. Only if you really want to kind of, I don't know, like I think the one thing about this book though that I really appreciated was just how in depth they went with each of the characters. Like you really felt like you were experiencing what they were thinking and what their actions were, and it was not linear. Like you would be in the present, but then like a paragraph later you're going through a memory of theirs, and each chapter is a different person's perspective. But like you might be like one paragraph you're in the present, but the next you're in like a memory that they're having at that moment, and you go through pages of that memory in detail, and it's a little jarring to read, but also it's so real, and I really appreciated that writing. Like the writing of this book is amazing. It's just the content of it that was a little dark, a little depressing to read. But I gave it 3 stars. It was worth 3 stars. I almost gave it 2 stars, but the ending really like it really took me. I did cry at the end because of just how, I don't know. It was a sad book, but I'm glad that I was able to read it. I'm glad that it's part of my collection, and yeah, definitely 3 stars. So the next book that I'm going to talk about is The Colorado Kid by Stephen King. So I actually liked this. It was a mystery. It's one of his hard crime novels that he worked with the hard crime people. He has 3 of them currently. I've read this one and Joyland. The only one that I haven't read so far is Later, it just came out this year. I do plan on reading it soon. Yeah, mysteries aren't really my thing. I don't really read a lot of mysteries because they don't really like captivate me as much as fantasies or sci-fi or like less realistic kind of stories. But I did really like this one. It followed this person that was kind of going through like she was a reporter and she was talking to like the 2 guys that work at the newspaper firm that she was interning in, and they were going through this like unknown story that was in the news, but that there was a lot of details that were left out because they were unanswered. There was no answer to the story of the Colorado Kid, of why he died. Like, what was the purpose of him dying? Who was he? Why was he there when he was? It was very much that kind of a mystery, and that like it was a mystery, and that there's so many unanswered questions, and there is no answer in the end. Now, if you want to know like the actual process of what happens, and if there actually is an ending, I definitely recommend reading it. It's not long. It's very short. But I gave it 3 stars. Again, I'm not a mystery person, but I do love Stephen King, so I had to pick it up. I had to read it. But I don't know. It wasn't really like catching me either. Like I was interested in the story only so far as what would be the ending, and that was about it. So, but it was a short read, so it was easy for me to get through, and it was definitely worth 3 stars. Okay, the next book that I'm going to talk about is What If It's Us by Becky Albertalli and Adam Silvera. I picked this book up, actually I believe my fiance picked this book up first, about a month and a half, 2 months ago, and we read the back of it. We immediately fell in love with it. It's just a cute, gay book about these 2 guys. One of them is doing an internship in New York City, so he's only there for the summer. The other one lives in New York City. He's lived there for a long time. He's gone through a hard breakup recently, and the other one is just an intern. He's new, to the city. He hasn't really been in a relationship, and they just happen to run into each other at the post office. I believe it was on his first week. The 2 characters were Arthur and Ben, and it was just so sweet. There were a lot of moments where you weren't sure if they were actually going to get together, if like it was just kind of awkward in some moments, but not in a bad way. Like it was awkward in that you were feeling what they were feeling, and that they weren't sure what was going on, you weren't sure what was going on, but it was so fun to like just kind of see them develop as characters, and like getting to know each other, and like me as the reader really enjoyed just seeing how they spoke with each other, how they spoke with their friends, and there were just so many sweet moments in this book. I actually found out there is a sequel coming out in December, and I definitely want to read it because it kind of left off on a cliffhanger, and I won't say what exactly happens, but let's just say there is definitely more to the story, and I'm really glad they're doing a second book for this. But I gave it 4 stars. It was really cute. It was, a romance contemporary kind of story, but there wasn't really it was just a very sweet, lighthearted romance, and I loved it so much. It definitely was worth me buying it. And again, I'm really looking forward to reading the second book, and I honestly want to read more from these authors. I haven't read anything from them other than this book, so it's definitely making me want to read more. Okay, so the next book I'm going to talk about, and actually I'm going to be talking about two books in this, is This Savage Song and Our Dark Duet by Victoria Schwab. So this is actually the first book I've ever read from Victoria Schwab, or V. Schwab, in the more adult fantasy books that she writes. And this is part of a duology. It is the Monsters of Verity duology. It takes place in a kind of dystopian world where the world kind of falls apart because of the introduction of monsters, of these creatures that are like, there's one that's like a vampire, there's one that's just shadow, and then there's one that's kind of this, basically figuring out emotions and whether or not someone has done something morally wrong, and kind of just the like peacekeeper, I guess you can call them, of the world. They're not inherently bad. In fact, you follow one of the main characters, August Flynn. He is that other type of monster, but he's more human than the other monsters that exist. And you also find out that the city of Verity, which is where the story takes place, isn't the only city. There are several other cities that are separated in their own kind of bubbles. But Verity is the one that's like the main setting for at least the Savage Song. Our Dark Duet kind of also takes place in a city called Prosperity, and it kind of follows the other main character, Kate Harker, and how she kind of like she's a main character in the Savage Song with August in the city of Verity, but then there's a reason why she ends up moving over to the city of Prosperity, and I'm not going to go into that. I don't want to spoil the ending of the Savage Song, but a lot happens between those two. It's kind of a rival romance in a sense, in that they come from two different sides. Verity is split up in half. One with, both have monster issues, but one of them kind of just fights the monsters, and like it's kind of slummy, it's kind of hard to live in. The other one seems more normal, only because there's a protection from the Harkers, which are these group of this kind of foundation that's protecting those that live in it if they give a certain amount of money and a certain amount of assets to the Harker Foundation. So when Kate and August meet each other, they don't know that they are Flynn and Harkers, but then they do find out, and their relationship kind of bubbles from there. You see the rivalry between them, but then you also see that there becomes an attachment with them. And it was such an interesting story. It really grabbed me. I read both of these books 2 days each, I believe. So I finished them really quickly, and it made me fall in love with Victoria Schwab. I want to read every book that she's written because I just love her writing style. And this was her YA books. I will actually tell you in a moment. I did read another of her books, and it was, her adult book where she goes by V.E. Schwab. And I fell in love with her even more from that. I won't go into detail with that yet, but I really, really loved these books. They both were 5 stars for me. And I highly, highly recommend, if you want to read a short series of duology that has to do with like fantasy, monsters, a little romance, I highly recommend this series. Okay, so the next book that I'm going to talk about is The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller. Anyone that's on Book Talk that has watched BookTube videos definitely have heard of this book. It is a retelling of the story of Achilles through the perspective of Pericles. And it is a romance. It is very much, it's the story, it's the complete story of Achilles and how, he eventually goes to the Trojan War. And I won't spoil how it ends if you don't know the story of Achilles. I actually didn't know the story of Achilles too much. I knew how it ended, but I didn't know really anything about him or about Pericles. So I went into this book pretty much blind with this lore. And I have to say, I love Greek mythology. It does scare me a little bit in that it's kind of hard to like get through sometimes. It's kind of complicated. There's a lot of people settings. But Madeline Miller does a really good job with getting you incorporated into the world, knowing who the characters are. She goes through as if you wouldn't have known who they were, and just introduces you to them and to their story. and it was really sweet. I loved that it was Persicles' kind of like view of who Achilles was and how their relationship bloomed, and it was so sweet. It made me cry at the end. I read this book in 2 days also, and I was reading it nonstop at night also because I could not put this down. And I definitely want to read Circe by Madeline Miller also. I haven't read that one. It makes me even want to read more retelling stories that I haven't picked up, but I cannot recommend this book enough. I gave it 5 stars, and if you haven't read this already, you should read it. Okay, the next book that I'm going to talk about is The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo by Stieg Larsson. I haven't read any of the Girl with the Dragon Tattoo series. It's one of those series that I've heard a lot about, but I haven't really had an interest in it exactly. I didn't even know really what it was about. I know that they have movies for all 3 of the books, and I do actually want to watch the movie now that I've read this first book. But it was pretty interesting. It takes place it's a kind of sort of a murder mystery about this family, the Vangers, and how Harriet Vanger disappeared. She just disappeared from this one day about, I think it was like 30 or 40 years ago, when there was a car accident in like this little island in Sweden. And the whole family, the Vanger family, was kind of focused on the car accident because one of their family members was a part of it. But then all of a sudden Harriet disappeared. And the person that hires this reporter in a newspaper tells him that like he's been trying to figure out where Harriet went, if Harriet was killed, for his entire life, and he could not figure it out. It was a cold case. It was buried. No one really cared anymore except for him. And so he hires this reporter. He basically like hires him to try and figure out the story, to try and figure out where Harriet went. And at first, Bonkthus only does it to try and get some material for a case that he was kind of involved in. He had to go to jail for a few months because of it. I don't want to go into too much detail. It's kind of complicated, honestly. I had a really hard time following it in the very beginning of the story. But it really picks up when you start to see him uncover some things that were not known before. And it picked up in the middle of the book. I honestly was about to DNF this book. It wasn't really getting to me. It is a translated book from Swedish. So like there's a lot of names and locations from like Sweden and Swedish that it was really hard for me to grasp. But once we were able to get through that like beginning phase and really delve into the mystery of the missing Harriet, it really started to speed up, and I actually couldn't put the book down for the last day or two that I was reading this. It was actually the one I just finished, so this is like the most recent book that I finished. I was going to give it 2 stars if I was able to finish it, but because I was able to finish it and it actually did have a really interesting plot, I gave it 3 stars. I really want to watch the movie. I'll let you know if I do watch it in the next vlog that I put out. But yeah, I think I would recommend this book. I want to read the next book. I actually have it. My friend Cass actually let me borrow this book, so thank you, Cass, for letting me borrow it. And she's letting me borrow the second book too. So I'm definitely interested in continuing the series. I want to see how they even continue it. I mean, they have characters I could see having more mysteries to solve maybe, but I don't know if it's like a new mystery or if it's still following the like Vanger family. Either way, I'm really interested, and yeah, I definitely would give this book a read. Okay, we're almost done. So the next book that I'm going to talk about is The Kiss Quotient by Helen Hoang. I have heard so many people tell me that this book is worth reading. It was steamy. It dragged you in immediately. I loved the characters. I loved the like connections and dialogue that they had. It made me worried for the main character. Like Stella was just such a beautiful character to work with. Apparently the author is Stella in a way, like she was using her own experiences for, working through Asperger's, which Stella has, and kind of seeing how that like affected her life. And I mean the story is about Stella, who has Asperger's. She cannot seem to get what relationships are, and like she tries to figure out like, is she good at sex, because she really hasn't had much of it. And so she hires escort who she wants him to teach her how to have good sex and how to have a relationship. And at first it's kind of like awkward because obviously that's not what escorts do, and she was very uncomfortable with it. But then he starts to slowly see her getting more comfortable, and then the escort starts to fall in love with her. Michael starts to fall in love with her back, but he doesn't want to admit it. And the whole story is just a cute story about how like they fall in love with each other, but they don't want to fall in love with each other because that's not what they originally intended to do. And it was just it went so quickly. I think there's actually a few other books that follow these characters, and I really want to look into getting those stories and kind of reading those again. But it was just so cute. I loved it. I read it in like a day. It was so good. I would want to reread this even now. So I gave it 5 stars, no doubt. Okay, the next book that I'm going to talk about is Saga Volume 4. So I think I had mentioned it in my previous video, but the Saga, I've been reading it for the last few months. I've been reading about a volume a month. I love this story. In case you don't know, Saga follows two different races of people, and these two people that are different races that are warring with each other fall in love and have a baby. And so now they're rebels. They have to try and escape from these other, like from the two warring sides, and them wanting to like capture them and kill them, or torture them, try to figure out what's going on. It's so sweet. It's following them in their life and trying to escape from forces that are trying to stop them. Their child grows up in the story. She's actually an infant in this volume, and there were definitely some really good twists in this. It always captivates me. I love the art in it, and I'm going to be reading the 5th book in June, as I said in the TBR video. I love it so much. I gave this 4 stars. I've been giving graphic novels 4 stars, pretty much standard. Nothing's really come out as being a 5-star story for me yet. So, but I mean, maybe that'll change with this. Maybe it'll change with a different graphic novel that I continue in the future. But I really recommend Saga if you're interested in, like sci-fi, fantasy, aliens, kind of like, there's some really dark moments in this story, and there definitely are some like brutal scenes. So like don't go into it if you're kind of queasy to that. But the drawings of it, the story of it, it's so good. I highly recommend it. Okay, and then the final book that I'm going to recommend to you guys and that I am going to explain is The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab. I told you that I read another Victoria Schwab book. This is the first book I actually read of hers that was for, in the adult fiction, and it's the newer book that she just wrote. I fell in love with this book immediately. So it follows Addie, and she actually was born in the 1700s, and she doesn't like her life. She is about to get married to this man that she doesn't really love. She wants to have control over her life, but her father's always told her what to do. Her mother's always told her what to do. Everyone in the village, it's a small village in France, has told her what to do, who to be, that she's going to be stuck there, that she's going to be a wife, that she's going to have kids, that she's going to take care of the house and the farm, and that's it. That's all she's going to be. But she doesn't want that. She doesn't just want that. She loves to draw. She wants to explore. She wants to live life and be her own person. So she prays to the gods and tries to figure out a way to get out of it. And on her wedding day, she doesn't have anything left. She's been giving offerings every single day to try and get out of what's going on. And on her wedding day, she disappears. And she gives the last thing that she has, which is a wooden ring that her father had made for her. And she prays one last time to try and get out of it. But she doesn't realize that night had just fallen. And she was always told not to pray to the gods at night because you don't trust the gods that come and answer. And someone answers, a shadow answers her, and tells her that she can make a deal with him and that she can be free, but that she will have to give her soul to him when she doesn't want it anymore, when she doesn't want to be free anymore. And of course she's going to take the deal. What she doesn't realize is that because of the deal, no one remembers her. She can have a conversation with someone, and then if they look away, if she leaves, they won't remember who she was. And so she she can't have connections with people. She can't even own anything because she's invisible. And the other thing is that she can live forever. She can't be her. She can feel pain, but she can't die. So she's going through hundreds of years, seeing history unfold, and changing her own perspective of life and what the meaning of it is, and making the connections when she can, making influences in the world that isn't necessarily hers, but that she's kind of inspiring. And like how many different arts and like poems and stories are written because of her, even though no one remembers who she is. It's such a good, it's like historical fiction, but it's also fantasy with the god thing, and then there is romance. I'm not going to tell you why there's romance, but there definitely is romance in the story. And it kind of goes back and forth in chapters of like her past and then her present in 2014 in New York City, and kind of gives like little like filling the holes of her life and why she acts the way she does in 2014. But it's such a good book. If you love fantasy and you love like kind of how history develops and changes people's lives, I would really recommend this book. Even if you don't like any of that stuff and you just want a fantasy read that's really fun to read and really like captivates you, and you figure out more and more as you go, I would recommend this book any day, every day. It's definitely a top favorite for this year, hands down. Okay, so that is my video. Thank you so much. I'm really happy with everything that I read this month. It was one of the biggest reading months I had in the whole year. I'm hoping that June will be the same, and then I'm hoping that there's even more good reads to come. So thank you again. Please like and subscribe to my channel, and I'm hoping that I can continue giving you my feedback and my reviews, and to really hopefully inspire all of you to read good books. Thank you.